Xu Jing joins us from Madrid. Welcome, Xu Jing.
Thank you.
When you watch Xu Jing on panel discussion, he always comes across as one of the best persons. We had a session the other day, and Jeffrey Lipman said about Xu Jing, always very simple messages, always very clear messages. I couldn't agree more. Very clear, very structured, very entertaining, and messages right to the bone. Xu Jing was a top executive in UNWTO for many years, and now he advises people, companies on Asian tourism, and we have the great pleasure of listening to his presentation now. Xu Jing, welcome a lot.
Thank you, Jan. A very good morning or good afternoon or even good evening to our distinguished audience throughout the world. I'm very glad to be here, joining as part and parcel of this China summit of the BUZZ.travel Expo. It's indeed a pleasure for me because in the long past, I'm used to speak in front of an audience which maximum would be in the range of something like 100, 200, and certainly less than 1,000. But with this, current situation, and digital platform has provided us a very, very unique opportunity for us to speak to a much wider spectrum of audience, and I'm so glad to be part of this summit today. Now, this is day 2, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday, we heard a lot of excellent presentations and speeches, and today as well. As compared with what you have heard from day 1, as well as from the previous presentations this morning, my talk probably will not be that market specific. It will not be into any of those technicalities of either the European market or the Chinese market. Rather, today, using the next 15 minutes, what I intend to do is to look at, in general terms, how Europe has to be prepared when Asia comes back to Europe, and especially when the Chinese tourists return to Europe as part of the post-COVID-19 recovery process. The first question that I would like to ask myself addressing this issue is, are we ready here in Europe as far as the Chinese coming back to Europe? Are we ready only for version number 1, which we're used to when we receive the Chinese in Europe, or are we ready to think about a new penetration version, a version that will be more catering to the new normal of the Chinese people returning to Europe? Based on this wavelength of thinking, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm not going to talk about the typical professional way of dealing with the issue, typically that you analyze the market segmentation of the first-tier cities in China, the second-tier, the primary, the secondary, or the opportunity markets. These kind of analysis, I would rather leave it to professional consulting firms such as Howard or such as McKinsey or any of the tourism planning or marketing consultancy firms, or leave it to the NTO marketing boards to look at it. For me today, I would like to concentrate basically on how we can build bridges between Europe, where I have lived for many years, and with the Chinese as a source market. And from this angle, building bridge, I would like to look at basically 2 perspectives. Number 1, how we can have a better cultural understanding of the Chinese tourists or Chinese people as a whole. And leading from there, I go to the number 2, how we design accordingly the version number 2 of our products as far as the returning Chinese are concerned. But let me first by extend my sincere appreciation to the organizer led by Yan and his team, because this beautiful digital platform will give us a very good opportunity not only to reach a wider spectrum of audience, but more importantly, today, this is a good timing for us to actually rethink or reflect what has been done by European marketing professionals vis-a-vis the Chinese tourists, and using the COVID-19, unfortunately, as a breathing space to look at how we can be better prepared when the Chinese return. So based on this, I would like to give you a few sort of preliminary thoughts on this concept of cultural understanding vis-a-vis the product diversification. But before that, before these 2 points, ladies and gentlemen, I would very much like to, first of all, look at, so to speak, a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is what is really China for Europe and what is Europe for China? Strictly from the tourism perspective, I'm not going to talk about the history or the population or any other political or economic aspects. Strictly from tourism side, Europe now takes roughly 45 to 48% of the international tourist arrivals. So more or less, it is the half of the market share of the world tourism. It used to be actually more than that. It started around like 60, and then it decreased up to the current stage of more or less 45 to 48% in favor of Asian markets. And this is about Europe. And about China. China, as you all recall, starting from 2012, China became the world's largest outbound market of tourism. 1 out of every 10 international travelers crossing national borders, one of them is a Chinese. So based on this, you can imagine how significant these 2 continents, both as tourism source market as well as tourism destinations, how significant they are when it comes to the topic of world tourism. In other words, if we can deal well with these 2 significant supermarkets, we have done half of the job for the success of world tourism. And especially we have done more than half of the job when it comes to the tourism recovery process post-COVID-19. This is probably the first small point that I wanted to share with you, to look at the bigger picture of Europe and China when it comes to tourism markets. Second, I would like to actually remind everyone that yes, we are in the depths of this pandemic. Yes, we have lost millions of jobs. And yes, that we have a huge cash flow issue. But I would like to be reminded myself as well that the fundamentals of these 2 markets, both as source and as destinations, none of the fundamentals have changed and will change. And this is the starting point to build our confidence for reopening to each other the markets. So we should not forget that these fundamental elements, with or without the COVID-19, have not changed and will not change. So as my first point, the bigger picture. My second point is about the cultural understanding. I have lived in Europe for more than 20 years, and I really wanted to use my personal experience to look at these two markets, and especially to look at when European professionals receive the Chinese tourists in the last decade or even almost 2 decades. What I wanted to share with you, number one, there's a huge degree or high degree of complementarity when it comes to the two continents. China, on one hand, its history, its population, its civilization, its way of thinking, or its general cultural background are very different from what you have here in Europe. The monuments, the heritage, the way of thinking, the habits. And because of these two very vast degree of differences, we have high complementarity. And this is the very opportune conditions for any tourism professionals. It's like the commodity trading. If you don't have the complementarity, what is good for you, if it is also good for others, you cannot sell the products. It's the same. If you have a high degree of complementarity of cultural heritage, then you are attracted to each other by both European people to China and the Chinese people coming to Europe. Now, because of this high degree of complementarity, it is also the downside when receiving the Chinese people. Why? It is because we are so different. The two races of people are so different. So our way of understanding each other are equally different. It is this high degree of differences that have made receiving the Chinese market much more difficult than as if French receiving the Germans receiving the British, or in some of these Southeast Asian countries who are used to the Western behavior when it comes to receiving the European people. Now, these differences, I would like to look at a few aspects. Number one, when the Chinese travel, their way of thinking is very much in a collective way. That collective way is probably can be traced back to the Confucius philosophy. Whereas the European people, when they travel or when they behave, when they act, it is more based on individualism. And because of this mindset differences, we really have to understand how the Chinese, when they come to Europe, in terms of protocol, in terms of way of thinking, in terms of eating habits, and in terms of many, many other behavior as a tourist. When they come into as a result, for instance, when they come to a hotel, if it is an upmarket, they expect the bellboy immediately picking up the luggage. They expect a chilled towel or a hot towel to be provided as a symbol of hospitality, or they expect a nice cup of tea when they check into their hotel room. This probably is not so much demanded by the European tourists because they thought, you don't need to be bothered, and I can bring my own luggage into the room. And this is very different protocol when it comes to receiving the Chinese. Now, this is extremely important. Even the eating habits. What is the eating habits? Even for super rich upscale market, they don't want to spend the eating time more than 1 hour devoting to the taste of the red wine which bottle it is, which brewery this comes from, and the rest of it. They would rather go and do some shopping or even do group photo in front of a monument. But if you look at what the European tourists as their behavior, this has nothing to do with all these way of thinking. So quality service without the cultural background, it is a different understanding. You need to understand the cultural differences between the Chinese vis-a-vis the European. And I think with this kind of a better understanding, then people will know their sensitivity. And when you do the product design, and this comes to my second major point about product design, then you will probably think their way to be more caring, to be more sensitive, because the Chinese, or in that matter, for most of the Asian tourists, even if they are not happy, they will swallow. They will not complain. Unlike the Americans, they will complain, but it doesn't mean that they're happy. So what they will do is that they will not come to your destination next time. Like the Japanese travelers, they are like this. So having a better understanding with your cultural background is so much essential in product design. Now, this brings me to the second point of my presentation, which is about product design. Now, everyone says that tourism will no longer be the same and in the new normal. But what is the difference of your version number 1 in terms of tourism or version number 2 in terms of tourism products? To me, in general terms, the product should be more slow-paced like any other markets, and it also speaks the truth for the Chinese market. But within that, my message is that the product offer in Europe for the Chinese, probably the existing products, around 80% of them are not being provided to the Chinese when it comes to gastronomy tourism, when it comes to vast space of coastal tourism, the beach tourism, all these classic products of sports-related, soft adventure, and probably more outdoor sports-related activities. None of these are being provided to the Chinese. Probably stage number 2, you need to go for that direction. Currently, as we speak, most of the itineraries are multi-destination, short sightseeing tours. So we need to change that into more eco-friendly, climate travel friendly, as well as more slow-paced tourism. Now, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, what I would like to leave with you, a message. You all have been informed that the Chinese have just returned from their week-long National Day holiday, or this year it is also combined with the Mid-Autumn Festival. Within 1 week, more than 600 million Chinese travelers, they have traveled, and more than 600 million trips have been made within China. This itself is a strong indication for the confidence of our recovery of the Chinese market to the rest of the world. And with that, I would like to leave with you, and I'm confident not only the Chinese market, but the Asian markets, none of the major fundamentals will change, and we will have a bright future, as bright as before. I thank you.
Thank you, Xu Jing. None of the fundamentals have changed, you said, but we need to deal a bit differently with some of the fundamentals, I guess. As I said in the introduction, very clear messages, very good structured. It's a pleasure to listen to your talk. Thank you so much, Xu Jing.
Thank you, Jan.